Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Concentration Check. I'm your host, Wyatt,
And I'm Tony.
and we're here today to bring you another episode of our adventures or misadventures in Dungeons and Dragons and tabletops, etc. We covered DM styles in the last episode, and we covered backstories in the first one. So I've been asked a lot from people around on Amino or Reddit, Discord to do one, which we probably should have done first, but we got a couple of episodes together now for people to go back into. But the topic for this one is how to get new players into playing, which, considering that, Dungeons and Dragons is almost 40 years old, uh, would probably be a good piece of advice to pass through, don't you think?
Yeah, but at the same time, the game does bring in new players. I think it's more of making people comfortable with coming into the game.
Yeah, I mean there certainly is a stigma about it. There's always the images of either the people who are wearing like robes or whatever that are all acne faced or speak with a lisp, still live in their mom's basement. We've all heard the stories of the sweaty neckbeards, and for the most part, they're warranted in the spots that's true. But most of us we are just normal everyday people, and I think as Dungeons and Dragons and fantasy becomes more in the mainstream of pop culture with things such as Game of Thrones or Stranger Things and everything else, it's really important that people who finally say like, "Hey, I want to play Dungeons and Dragons. I want to see what it's like." They really need to understand something. And my biggest gripe on it, we've kind of touched about it in our first episode, is people don't kind of like they don't understand how Dungeons and Dragons work when it's their first time. They kind of just say like, "Oh, I want to play Dungeons and Dragons. It seems so cool. I want to do this. I want to do that," and then they sit down at the table and it's nothing like what they expect. They usually think it's going to be a grand, epic uh, adventure that's just going to put them in the pretty much like the pilot seat.
Kind of like they really think of it as more of a video game than anything else. They expect to be at the front of the action at all moments and to be making each and every choice. And if they don't like a choice, then they get bummed out or upset. And
Yeah. So I think point number one is understand what you're playing. Um, D&D at its core is a social game, even for people who fancy themselves introverts and are socially anxious or anything like that. Um, D&D allows you to kind of come out of your shell a little bit, and it lets you uh, interact with a group of people that you may or may not interact with normally, but through your characters, you begin to develop some sort of bond. But you had to understand that this is a interactive game. It is a team game, and depending on your DM, you might not nor ever be the main focus of attention. It could always be on the party. So you just gotta understand that at that point, that's what you're getting into, and to not be discouraged. Once you finally sit down to play.
and I think a lot of it is just come to the table ready to have fun and kind of think of other people. Just don't think of yourself and how they want to play the game. Just be considerate. Don't try to hog all the light. If you've noticed that you've may interrupt someone a lot, try to minimize interruptions and be interactive with everyone. Don't sit on the side on your phone and when dialogue's happening go, "Oh, what was that?" You're you kind of just you ruin the immersion of being in this new fantasy world that your DM provided for you. And mind you, the DM takes a lot of time out of their day to build these stories for times.
Yeah, I think as well. when you're talking about interruptions or anything else like that, uh, people tend to think it's new players, but more often than not, I've seen uh, really BM or bad mannered play come from older players as well. People that have been playing for years, and they just think like, oh, I already know everything there is to know. I already know how to do things. I'm just gonna lead the party. Um, this essentially falls down to rule number two: don't be a dick. Um, if you understand the rules and you are running with a new DM, don't be like, well, actually, it goes right here and says in page 694, Appendix B. No, just pull your DM to the side at the end of the game or at a break or whatever. Say, hey, man, or hey, woman, or lady, or whatever. Um,
Hey, person.
hey, person. Um, just you kind of messed up here. This is actually how it's supposed to go, and you might not know. They could be doing a homebrew rule, or they could be doing something different.
Or the monsters could just be able to take attacks of opportunity when you enter the threatened square.
Well, I mean that's your own fuck up there. But yeah, that sort of making these meta min maxing characters. I mean, once you get unless you like running a min max campaign where everyone's just super OP all the time. Everyone likes to be a superhero, um, but don't just generally do it just because I want to be the strongest person at the table. It's not a game about you. It's a game about everyone.
And it's a game about the story. It's more, at the end of it, it's a role playing game, right? So you are essentially getting into character and going through the story of your character and making your decisions. Whether your character's life ends at level 2 or you become level 20. It's the story that's presented in front of you, and it's alright to have your character die. That kind of adds on to it, and that could even be a key point later on where, uh, say, your character gets resurrected by the evildoers, and now your character, you're faced with your character, and you have to fight him.
I feel like that this whole podcast that we've been doing has just been giving you more and more ideas instead of like actually, you know, just being a podcast to do. It's more of like a brainstorm session for you.
Well, I think it just helps everyone. You talk about something and just an idea pops in your mind at a certain point, so you just bring it up and like, okay, that's a good piece of information. I'll take that to the side and keep that in my reservoir.
Okay, I can see that. Yeah, you're definitely right. I think along with how to combat some of these, uh, necessarily, I guess, chinks in the armor or BM as a, as you would categorize it, is to really do your research. Um, read the player's handbook, the dungeon master's guide. Even if you don't plan on becoming a DM, there is still a lot of good information you can find in that dungeon master's guide. And a lot of people will say, well, Wyatt, I don't have the money for it. And if you have the ability to listen to this, then you have the ability to go onto Google and read the PDFs. I can't tell you a little bit how frustrating it is to be, making this campaign for these people. And I send them, all the links, all the information, everything they need to know. And 2 weeks comes by, they sit down at the table and they have nothing done.
They don't even have a character sheet to write on.
Yeah, just be courteous. Understand that this is a game that takes an exorbitant amount of time. Our sessions usually run around 6 hours in length. And just understand that while the session may go for 6 hours, your DM has been planning this for weeks, if not a month in advance, about what you're going to be doing. And I want to preface this right now for anyone who has hopes of grandeur about finally getting to level 20 and finally becoming that pinnacle of power. I have played level 20 once, and we started the campaign at level 15. And It's not all that it's cracked up to be. It's uh, to the point where you're so overpowered, it just becomes a numbers simulation at that point. You already know everything. You're already the badass. Um, so just don't try to aim for that goal. Aim for making sure your character can live the next day.
Yeah, and I think once you hit level 20 at that point, you're kind of making decisions for the entire world, and it's not so much about your player or you or your group anymore. It's more about everything else, and I feel it's kind of hard at level 20 to kind of get back into, oh, I had a goal. You probably already accomplished your goal by then.
All right.
At that point, you kind of lose sight at what you're looking for.
Okay, so we've discussed understanding how you're playing. We've discussed reading the player's handbook. We've discussed certain faux pas. Um, now you're a little bit learned up. Where do you go from here? Well, uh, the beauty of the internet is here. Reddit r/LFG or looking for group. Get you in place with like-minded people. If you are at a high school or college, you can usually figure out the people, or you can talk to people and figure out if anyone wants to play D&D. And that's one of the things that I've noticed is uh, while people have this misconception or preconception about who plays, D&D is really widespread. Like it encompasses all groups and cliques and everything else. And some people you think would never play are actually avid players for years. So, you just get yourself out there, either make a post online or just talk to people. Hell, you can even do an online game like via Discord or Roll20, which Roll20 is really nice because it actually has a map generator where you can move your characters, you can do rolls and everything. It's not the exact same experience, but I use it myself sometimes when I'm playing with friends from out of state or anything else like that. Um, Tony, what about you? What do you have any information if they're all good to go? They just find people to go with.
Well, one place to kind of stop, and it's usually pretty good stop, is D&D and Beyond. It's a pretty good resource. I've used it numerous times. There's creatures on there that you can look at. Kind of tells you all the races, and you can kind of just build your character there. It doesn't have everything, but it's a good place to start at least. So that's one resource. Have done the Roll20 before, and it's worked pretty well. It's really good for the DM as well because there's a lot of tools within that
Right.
for them to do and generate. You can make pre like characters names, have little icons, and it does give you like a grid system. So that's also a good one.
For mobile users out there, there's Amino, and I know I've said Amino like 4 or 5 times in the past 2 episodes. I swear we're not sponsored by them. I just personally use the app and I love it. But they actually have a Dungeons and Dragons Amino on there, and I've used that to find a couple of Discord and Roll20 games. And it's generally pretty good on most occasions. I'm not going to talk about Adventures League because and for those of you who don't know, Adventures League is ran by Wizards of the Coast, and it has people who are quote unquote certified storytellers or DMs to actually come in and create a module that everyone sits around different tables to run, and they continue on week by week. I will not ever harp about those because I myself have never gone to one. I've always just been lucky enough to find people to play with at the house.
I did sit through one. I was at a convention. I don't remember which one, but they had they had a D&D going, and the Adventures League was there. And you can sign up for an account. You kind of tracks your progress through it. Um, I thought it was pretty good. It's pretty quick. They have pre-generated characters there, and you can just hop into. Well, you put your name down, and then you hop into the game. And I had a good time. You meet a lot of different people, and I, I'd recommend it for you if you're starting out, because they have the beginner players, which is 1 through 4, and then 5 through 12, I think it is, and then uh, they have what comes after that. I really didn't play much of it, but from what I did experience, it was a good time.
So I think we're at this point in the show where we just kind of talk about little different tips and tricks. I think we've kind of gone over what we need to go over. So I am going to give you guys some resources to look at, especially on YouTube. So XP to level 3, the Dungeon Dudes, DM It All, a few others that Esper the Bard, Dappy Chappy, all these guys, they talk about the intricacies of, Dungeons and Dragons. They talk about the lore a lot, especially another YouTuber by the name of RuneSmith. Will talk about all the lore, and they have their different viewpoints of how they see different classes or different races, but the information there is still good. And I will even find myself when I'm bored just clicking on YouTube and just watching it or just letting it play in the background, because it's just I like ingratiating myself in the lore and in the story of Dungeons and Dragons.
And kind of my advice that I'd give you too is when you're coming to the table, say you're playing a wizard or you're playing a monk or whichever role you're playing, uh, get a printout of maybe the page where the monk is, or have it readily available, because there's gonna be times where the DM might want to take a look at the spell you're casting. For instance, say hideous laughter, and then all of a sudden you just made this boss fight null and void when there was actually a save for the fight.
You're really salty about that.
A little bit, but again, it's important if the DM asks you, "Is there any saves?" and you go, "Well, there's one save," and then for the next minute, he can't make any attack moves. Kind of deal. And again, I'm kind of more relaxed. I'll generally just trust you, or the player who comes to the table and says, "Oh, this is what it does," and I'll go, "Okay." And then I'll wait till we have a small break or someone's like taking a while to decide on their next move, which also goes into the next thing. Be ready to make your move on your turn, because if you sit there and you have been talking and you haven't been paying attention, everyone's gonna look at you and go, "We're trying to get this game going. We're trying to make combat a little bit more smooth so we can move on and progress." So be ready for your move. Make sure you don't have to. I just highly recommend printing out your spells, because if they're the type of DM that wants to read it as you cast it so that they understand what's happening, then that's very important. Or you can just have it on your phone. There's a lot of apps out there now that have the spells on there. A lot of web pages where you can just quickly create a lot of tabs on your phone and just keep your phone charged and only use it. It's like, "Hey, here you go, DM," and you just hand them your phone and then they take a look at it.
Yeah. And that kind of ties in with another big thing, big tip is to talk with your DM, just in general. Just understand, the setting of what he wants for the story. If there's any race or class limitations he wants to do. I've ran a campaign that had no magic, and I made sure that my players were aware of that beforehand. Just before you get you get your hopes up about a certain thing, just make sure you talk with your DM. Why are you laughing?
Because I could only imagine that a guy comes to the table and he's like, "Yes, I picked a wizard," and you go, "There's no magic," and just the look on their face of just, "Oh man, I really messed up." And then they go and they're like, "Oh, I'm not backing out of this one. I'm a wizard that doesn't use magic."
So you're a nerd.
You're a nerd? All right, who's gonna be hating you when there's a trivia question, and you roll that nat 20, and then you realize you actually have to answer the question in character, not just rely on a dice roll.
Okay, so yeah, I've been that dickhead before. I've not been the dickhead to actually say, yeah, I'm still gonna make a wizard in a non-magical campaign. Um, but regardless, just talk with your DM. Understand the material that you're getting yourself into. Understand Dungeons and Dragons. Don't be that guy. And I promise you that you will have a great time in this great game. Please join us next week for another episode of Concentration Check. Stay safe and keep those dice rolls high.